Who in the hell let this trash on my yacht? The words, sharp and cold as shattered glass, sliced through the balmy Miami night. They didn't just cut the air. They butchered the elegant hum of conversation, the soft clinking of champagne flutes, the distant rhythm of a jazz trio playing on the mezzanine above. Every syllable dripped with a venomous entitlement that could only belong to one person. Genevieve Sterling. Wife of billionaire industrialist Arthur Sterling, she stood like a queen surveying her domain, draped in an imperial sapphire blue gown that shimmered under the yacht's golden lights, looking as if it were woven from the midnight sea itself. Her platinum blonde hair was sculpted into an impossibly perfect chignon, and a cascade of diamonds, the famed sterling ice, glittered at her throat. But the real ice was in her eyes. They were fixed, with surgical disdain, on a woman standing just inside the velvet ropes of the VIP section. That woman was Ilara Vance, and she was a vision in fire. Her gown was a stunning, defiant saffron, a slash of sunset against the cool blues and whites of the party. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, severe knot at the nape of her neck, a few rebellious strands already breaking free to dance in the humid Biscayne Bay breeze. One hand rested on the handle of a sleek, carbon fiber carry-on case. The other held a phone to her ear, the low, calm voice on the other end a stark contrast to the scene erupting around her. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't even acknowledge Genevieve's verbal assault. She didn't have to. The response was already in motion. Two hulking security guards, looking like they were carved from granite and stuffed into $1,000 suits, moved to flank her. Their movements were smooth, practiced, a silent, menacing ballet of exclusion. One of them leaned in, his voice a low growl meant to sound discreet but perfectly pitched, to be overheard by the gawking guests nearby. "Ma'am, this is a private reception. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the upper deck." No one mentioned a ticket. No one asked for an invitation. In this world, on this floating palace of obscene wealth, the wrong color dress on the wrong kind of person was evidence enough. The verdict was in. Guilty of not belonging. All around them the deck glittered. Tables draped in ivory linen were set with crystal and silver. Champagne flowed like water. A gaggle of women, their faces tightened by surgery and their fingers heavy with jewels, turned to each other, whispering behind perfectly manicured hands, their expressions a sickening mix of pity and morbid delight. The deep, steady rhythm of the ocean against the yacht's hull was a constant heartbeat beneath the sudden, suffocating tension. By the massive circular bar, a young server named Matteo froze, a bottle of Dom Perignon hovering over a flute. He knew that woman. He recognized her. 6 months ago, in a sterile conference hall in Berlin, he'd watched a live stream of her on a stage, speaking about the future of ethical technology with a quiet authority that silenced a room of cynical old men. Here, under the judgmental gaze of Miami's elite, she looked like an intruder. She looked like someone they could break. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Matteo unlocked his phone, opened the voice recorder app, and hit the glowing red button. He didn't know why, not really. It was just a feeling, a deep-seated instinct that this moment, this gross injustice, needed a witness. Genevieve took a theatrical sip of her champagne, her eyes never leaving Ilara. She let the silence stretch, savoring her power. Then, loud enough for her circle of sycophants to hear, she said with a malicious little smirk, "I wasn't aware we were letting the catering staff wear such vibrant colors this year." A wave of cruel, muffled laughter rippled through her audience. It was the sound of bullies who had never been challenged a day in their lives. Ilara finally ended her call with a soft tap on her screen. She slipped the phone into a hidden pocket of her gown, her movements unhurried, her gaze finally lifting to meet Genevieve's. The saffron dress billowed slightly in the wind, revealing the exquisite precision of its tailoring. It wasn't a party dress. It was armor. Up on the mezzanine, the band, oblivious, launched into a cheerful rendition of a bossa nova standard. But down here, the real performance was just beginning. And if anyone had bothered to look closely at Ilara's hand, they would have seen her fingers tighten on the handle of her case. Not from fear, not from anger, but with the cold, hard certainty of a woman who had already decided exactly how this night and Genevieve Sterling's entire world was going to end. Before we go any further, I have to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments below. Let us know you're here. And if you believe that dignity is non-negotiable and that justice should be for everyone, not just the rich, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell the stories that need to be told, the ones that spark real change. We're so glad to have you with us. Now let's get back to Ilara. On the surface, she was a beautiful trespasser who had stumbled into a world she didn't understand. But nothing about Ilara Vance was an accident. The saffron gown wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. The lack of jewelry was a conscious choice. The absence of an entourage was a strategic move. And the fact that her name wasn't on the list at the gilded check-in table downstairs? That was the entire point. Tonight was a test. And Genevieve Sterling was failing spectacularly. The Sterling Legacy Fund Gala was the most exclusive, most sought-after ticket in Miami. It was a glittering nexus of old money, new tech, and backroom deals disguised as philanthropy. What Genevieve didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom, was that Ilara Vance was not only on the board of the Sterling Legacy Fund, she was its silent, anonymous benefactor, the primary source of the very capital that made this lavish spectacle possible. She was the ghost in their machine, and she had decided it was time to haunt the palace. Genevieve took another predatory step forward, the sapphire of her gown a cold wave against the warm teak deck. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "We have a certain standard to maintain. Security is paramount." She tilted her flute, letting a single golden drop of champagne slide down the crystal like a crocodile's tear. Ilara's phone call was over. She met Genevieve's icy stare with a look of unnerving calm. "I'm sure you do," she said, her voice even and steady, betraying no hint of emotion. One of the guards, the bigger one, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the leather of his polished shoes groaning in protest. He was trying to look casual, but his eyes darted around the surrounding tables, silently pleading for backup or a distraction. The guests at the nearby tables were doing a terrible job of pretending not to watch. Their gazes were like vultures, circling, waiting for the kill. At the bar, Matteo kept his phone angled perfectly, the device hidden in the fold of a cocktail napkin. He remembered the authority in her voice from that Berlin keynote, the way she had systematically dismantled a powerful CEO's argument with nothing but facts and logic, never once raising her voice. This was that same energy, that same terrifying focus, but now it was coiled, compressed into a dangerous silence. Genevieve's plastic smile tightened. "I'll make this very simple for you. You can go and enjoy the party on the public lower deck with the other guests," she said, the slight pause before other a deliberate, poisonous dart. Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Ilara's carry-on case. "Or we can have my security escort you off the premises entirely." Ilara didn't move. She didn't even blink. "Is that the Foundation's official policy?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. Or is that just your personal preference? The question was so unexpected, so direct, that a few choked laughs escaped from the edges of the crowd before they could be suppressed. Genevieve's head whipped toward the sound, her eyes flashing with fury. The collective amusement died instantly. The atmosphere on the deck, which had been tense, now felt heavy, electric, like the air before a lightning strike. Somewhere near the stage, the MC's voice boomed over the sound system, introducing some minor celebrity or local politician. A wave of polite applause washed over the deck. But in this frozen circle of confrontation, no one made a sound. The taller guard, emboldened by his employer's glare, took a half-step forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist. That won't be necessary." The voice came from the shadows of a spiral staircase, leading down from the mezzanine. It was deep, resonant, and carried the effortless authority of a man who had never had to ask for anything twice in his life. Marcus Thorne, a senior board member and one of the few people who knew Ilara's true identity, stepped into the light. He wore a classic tuxedo, his silver hair catching the light. He recognized Ilara immediately, and a look of alarm crossed his face. But before he could diffuse the situation, Genevieve cut him off with a look that could curdle milk. "Actually, Marcus," she purred, her tone turning sickeningly sweet, like a blade dipped in honey. "It will be. We can't have disruptions, not in the VIP area." Ilara's gaze flickered past Genevieve for a fraction of a second, landing on Matteo. The young server swallowed hard, his knuckles white around his phone, but he didn't look away. He held her gaze. Ilara's fingers curled once, tightly, around the handle of her case. Then she looked back at Genevieve Sterling, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with absolute precision across the deck. "Are you absolutely certain you want to finish that sentence?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the humid night, while the cheerful party music played on, a bizarre soundtrack to a public execution. Genevieve's eyes narrowed into slits. She relished the challenge, the public display of her dominance. "I believe I will," she said, drawing out the words, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "We can't have just anyone strolling in here simply because they look the part." It wasn't shouted, but the insult was so blatant, so steeped in classist condescension, that it sent a fresh shockwave through the onlookers. A woman in a silver sequined gown leaned toward her husband, her mouth agape. Did she really just say that?" she whispered. He could only nod, his own expression one of stunned disbelief. "You heard her." Ilara remained a statue of saffron-clad calm. Her stillness was a weapon, and it was clearly beginning to unnerve the security guards. The taller one shifted his weight again, a nervous tick. The polished shoe squeaked, a tiny, pathetic sound in the suffocating silence. Upstairs on the mezzanine, a burst of genuine, carefree laughter floated down, a jarring reminder that another, happier party was happening just a few feet away, completely unaware of the war being waged below. The music felt thin now, hollow, unable to fill the void of pure tension. Matteo adjusted his grip on his phone, tilting it slightly to ensure he had both women perfectly in frame. He knew the audio was damning, but the image, the fiery, defiant saffron against the cold, imperial blue, told a story all its own. One was warm, commanding, alive. The other was cold, brittle, immaculate. Genevieve, high on her own power, closed the remaining distance between them until they were less than a foot apart. The cloying scent of her expensive perfume, a sharp floral, battled with the clean salt of the ocean air. "You're making this far more difficult than it needs to be," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "And on a night like this, well, let's just say my husband values order above all else." On that cue, The shorter, stockier guard made his move. He reached for the handle of Ilara's carry-on case. Ilara's hand was already there. She didn't move it. She didn't release her grip. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a simple command. "Let go." He didn't. He tugged. And in that one, simple, physical act, the confrontation escalated. It was no longer about words. It was about possession, about dominance. It was a silent, physical declaration that she, and everything she owned, had no claim here. Almost instinctively, as if they were a single organism, phones began to rise from the crowd. Not just Mateo's now, but a dozen others. The soft click of a photo being taken, then another. Victoria noticed the movement, her eyes darting toward the glowing screens. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. She raised her chin, projecting her voice to the amateur documentarians. "Feel free to photograph this," she announced. "We're simply ensuring our foundation's high standards are upheld for the safety of our esteemed guests." Ilara's gaze remained locked on Genevieve, drilling into her. "Standards?" she repeated, the single word soft, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. Marcus Thorne, the board member, stepped forward again, his face a mask of frustration. "Genevieve, for God's sake, not now." "Especially now," she snapped, her eyes never leaving Ilara's face. It was then that Mateo, the young server, made a choice. He was just a kid working a catering gig to pay for his college tuition. But in that moment, he felt a surge of courage he didn't know he possessed. He stepped out from behind the bar, his voice trembling but clear enough to be heard across the tense silence. "She belongs here." The entire crowd shifted, heads craned. Someone upstairs on the mezzanine leaned precariously over the railing, trying to see what was happening. Genevieve's lips curled into a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, really?" she purred, turning to face the young man. "And who, exactly, is she to you?" Mateo swallowed, the silence pressing in on him. "She's—" He stopped, his eyes flicking to Ilara, who gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "She's just a guest," he finished, his voice dropping. Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound more cutting than any insult. "Precisely my point." She turned back to the taller guard, her face a mask of cold fury. "Escort her out, now." The order was final, absolute, the kind that expected instant obedience, but Ilara Vance remained rooted to the spot, her saffron dress catching another gust of wind, flowing around her like a living flame that refused to be extinguished. Her hand tightened one last time on the case handle, then released it, not in surrender but in a final, chilling act of calculation. She let the silence do the work. She let the cameras roll. She let them all watch. The taller guard, a man named Frank who was 2 years from retirement and just wanted a quiet night, moved first. He stepped into Ilara's personal space with the weary confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. His large hand closed around the handle of her rolling case. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We're going to take a little walk now." Ilara's eyes never left Genevieve's face. "You're absolutely certain," she said. Not a question, but a final offer to reconsider. "That this is the choice you want to make? In front of all of them?" She tilted her head ever so slightly toward the half-moon of onlookers, the sea of upturned faces and glowing phone screens, the professional photographer near the back, whose press badge dangled from his neck like a promise of tomorrow's headlines. Genevieve's poisonous smile didn't waver for a second. "Absolutely." Frank, the guard, gave the case a firm tug. It didn't budge. "Did you not hear her?" A new voice called down, sharp and clear, from the mezzanine railing above. It was Isabel Chen. a young tech billionaire known for her disruptive investments and her zero-tolerance policy for fools. She was leaning over the railing, clad in a stunning emerald green cocktail dress, her own phone in her hand, the camera's red recording light glowing brightly. She belongs here. I saw her name myself on the board's official seating chart. A few confused murmurs rippled through the guests. This was a new, unexpected wrinkle in the drama. Another voice? This one male joined in from the starboard side. A man in a sharp navy blazer who'd been quietly observing spoke up. And even if her name wasn't on a chart, is this really how you treat people at a charity gala? What kind of legacy is this? Genevieve's head snapped toward the new voices, her face twisting in fury. This is a private security matter. Not anymore, it isn't, the man in the blazer shot back. Not when half the damn party is watching. The shorter guard now stepped forward, flanking Ilara's other side. The move was meant to be a show of force, to intimidate her into submission, but it only succeeded in making the scene look more like a hostage standoff. From the corner of his eye, Ilara saw Matteo edging closer, his phone held steady, a silent, courageous sentinel. Ilara's voice, when it came, cut through the rising chaos like a surgeon's scalpel, low, precise, and devastating. You don't get to erase someone just because they don't fit your narrow, outdated idea of who belongs at the table. That line landed with the force of a physical blow. The photographer's camera began clicking in a rapid, furious burst, the sound like a tiny machine gun. Upstairs, more and more guests were now crowded against the railing, their phones forming a bank of digital spotlights, all trained on the drama below. Genevieve's tone sharpened to a shrill command. Security! Touch her, and you will live to regret it. This time it was Marcus Thorne, his voice booming with rage. He stepped fully into the circle, physically placing himself between Ilara and the guards. I know exactly who this woman is, Genevieve, and I swear to you, if you lay a single hand on her, it won't be her who leaves this yacht tonight. The taller guard, Frank, hesitated. His job was to follow orders, but his instincts were screaming at him that this was a monumental mistake. He glanced at Genevieve, looking for confirmation, for a sign. Her jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in her cheek. Do your job. Ilara shifted her weight, planting her feet as if she were growing roots into the teak deck. The saffron fabric of her dress swirled around her, a warm, living fire against the cold, static blue that stood inches away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break eye contact. She just delivered the final, fatal blow. This is the moment, she said, her voice a calm, chilling prophecy, that you will remember when you are forced to explain to the international press why the Sterling Legacy Fund just lost $5 billion in funding. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Their effect was like a silent detonation. The murmuring swelled into a roar of disbelief. The photographer lowered his camera, turning to the person beside him and whispering, "Did she just say 5 billion?" Matteo stopped recording for a second, his thumb hovering over the screen as he processed what he'd just heard. He didn't need more proof, but he started recording again anyway. History was being made. Genevieve blinked. It was just one tiny, involuntary movement. But for everyone who was watching with breathless attention, it was the first visible crack in the flawless, icy facade. The empire was beginning to crumble. Genevieve Sterling was a fighter, and she recovered with the speed of a cornered predator. She forced a laugh, a brittle, ugly sound. "Funding?" she scoffed, making a great show of brushing an invisible speck of dust from her gown's perfect sleeve. "Please. My husband's circle could replace any donor 10 times over. Do you really think anyone here is going to miss whatever little contribution it is you make?" A few people in the crowd, the ones whose fortunes were most closely tied to the Sterlings, chuckled nervously, unsure if it was still safe to be on her side. Isabel Chen, the woman in the emerald dress, just shook her head from above, a look of utter disgust on her face. The man in the navy blazer muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath, and took a long, deliberate sip of his champagne. Ilara's lack of reaction was more powerful than any outburst. Her stillness seemed to absorb the insult, rendering it impotent. It was like throwing a rock at a mountain. Genevieve turned, playing to the crowd she was rapidly losing. "I do apologize that you've all had to witness this unfortunate disruption," she said, her voice oozing insincere regret. "I suppose some people simply mistake a bold choice of color for an invitation to belong." Her eyes slid back to Ilara, lingering on the saffron dress with theatrical contempt. That was a mistake. The line had been crossed. The murmurs from the crowd turned sharper, angrier. Even Frank, the taller guard, shifted uncomfortably, his grip on the case finally loosening. Marcus Thorne spoke again, his voice like cold iron. "Genevieve, that is enough." But she was too far gone, lost in her own hubris. "Gentlemen," she commanded the guards, "remove her, now." They stepped forward in unison, a final, reluctant advance. The younger one reached for Ilara's arm and froze. Her phone had lit up in her hand. The screen glowed, displaying a single contact name at the top: Board Operations. She pressed a single button on the screen. "Activate Protocol 8, she said, her voice clear and calm. A clipped professional voice on the other end replied instantly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Confirmed. Executing now." Genevieve actually laughed, a sound tinged with hysteria. "What is that supposed to be? Some kind of pathetic bluff?" Ilara didn't answer. She simply slid the phone back into her gown's hidden pocket and calmly retook her grip on the handle of her case. From the bow of the yacht, the soft, musical chime of the PA system echoed across the deck. The jazz trio on the mezzanine faded into silence. A man's voice, the official event MC, came over the speakers, sounding slightly flustered. "Attention guests, please be advised we will have a brief, unscheduled announcement from the board." Heads turned. Conversations died. Even the band members stopped packing their instruments to listen. Genevieve frowned, a look of genuine confusion on her face. "What is this?" Marcus Thorne didn't even look at her. "That, Genevieve," he said with grim satisfaction, "is the sound of you fatally overplaying your hand." Ilara took a single, deliberate step forward. Not enough to be threatening, but enough to completely close the space between them, to force Genevieve to look up at her. Her voice was low, almost conversational, yet it carried the chilling weight of absolute truth. "In approximately 90 seconds, every single person on this yacht will know exactly who I am. The only question left is how you're going to explain this scene to them when they do." Mateo's phone captured it all. The quiet, devastating words, the unshakable tone, and the flash of something in Genevieve Sterling's eyes that was no longer confidence. It wasn't even anger. It was the dawning, sickening horror of recognition. And that's when the first clap echoed across the deck. It was tentative, then another joined, and another. It was scattered, but it was real, and it was unmistakably, unequivocally, in Ilara's corner. The scattered applause didn't die out. It grew. It swelled into a wave of sound that Genevieve couldn't shout down, couldn't dismiss, couldn't silence with a withering glare. She turned, her head whipping around as if searching for her husband, Arthur, for rescue, but he was nowhere to be seen. From the yacht's speakers, the MC's voice returned, now filled with a sense of gravity and awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a very special welcome to a surprise guest and the co-host of tonight's Sterling Legacy Fund Gala." The deck fell into a state of suspended animation. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversations were cut off mid-word. Even the gentle lapping of the bay against the hull seemed to pause in anticipation. Genevieve's perfectly painted smile faltered, cracking at the edges. "Co-host?" she repeated under her breath, the word sounding alien and impossible on her tongue. Marcus Thorne stepped aside, a master of ceremonies in his own right, creating a clear path for Ilara toward the small riser at the center of the deck. The security guards didn't just fail to stop her, they actively moved out of her way. Frank, the older one, took a full step back, his eyes cast down at the deck, the picture of shame. Ilara's heels clicked a steady, resolute rhythm across the teak as she walked. The saffron fabric of her dress flowed around her, a warm, blazing comet against the cool, dark night. Matteo followed at a respectful distance, his phone still held high. He didn't need to record anymore. The entire room was recording now, dozens of guests lifting their devices, becoming the very witnesses Ilara knew she would need. At the riser, Ilara paused. She didn't reach for the microphone right away. Instead, she let her eyes sweep across the entire scene. She scanned the stunned faces in the crowd, the packed mezzanine railings, the clusters of people by the bar, the tables along the starboard side where the whispers had first started. Finally, her gaze came to rest back on Genevieve Sterling, who was still rooted to the same spot near the railing, her imperial blue gown now looking like a bruise under the golden lights. "Before I begin," Ilara started, her voice carrying across the deck without any strain, without any hint of the ordeal she had just endured. "I want to thank the Sterling Legacy Fund for hosting this truly beautiful evening, and for inviting me to stand here before all of you tonight." She let the words hang in the air, their delicious double meaning settling over the crowd like a fine mist. A few people exchanged knowing glances. This was a master at work. "My name," she continued, her voice resonating with a newfound power, "is Ilara Vance. I am the founder and CEO of Phoenix Global Capital." A ripple of recognition, of shock, went through the crowd. Phoenix Global was a legendary, almost mythical, private equity firm, known for its aggressive, transformative, and highly secretive investments. "I also have the privilege of sitting on the board of this foundation." She paused then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips as she delivered the coup de grace. "And for the past 3 years, I have been the single largest individual donor in its history." The reaction was instantaneous and electric, a collective gasp, a storm of whispers, a few sharp intakes of breath. Upstairs, someone actually let out a single, loud clap before realizing they were alone and quickly stopping. Genevieve Sterling's face was a blank, frozen mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her champagne flute, the delicate crystal looking as if it might shatter from the pressure. Ilara shifted her weight slightly, her tone remaining measured, almost academic. "I chose to arrive tonight unannounced, without an entourage, and without the usual formalities that tend to precede wealth. I did this because I wanted to experience this evening not as a benefactor, but through the eyes of every guest, every staff member, every volunteer who makes an event like this possible. And I did." Her gaze swept deliberately toward the bar, finding Matteo, who stood taller, a look of profound validation on his face. Then, her eyes, like a hawk returning to its prey, found Genevieve again. "And what I saw," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in, "was that in some circles, dignity is still a conditional commodity. It is granted based on recognition, on whether or not someone fits a preconceived notion, a name on a list." The crowd was utterly, completely silent now, the kind of silence that feels heavier and louder than any noise. "Tonight," Ilara concluded, her voice ringing out into the Miami night, I am here to announce that we are changing that." The applause came again, but this time it wasn't scattered or tentative. It was a unified, roaring ovation. It was thunder. Phones stayed up, flashes sparking across the deck like a sudden starburst. And somewhere in that overwhelming sound, in that public coronation, Genevieve Sterling's own suffocating silence was the loudest, most damning note of all. Victoria attempted to salvage the situation with a forced, brittle laugh, the sound of a woman trying to pretend a car crash was a minor fender bender. She glided forward, raising her glass in a gesture of magnanimous forgiveness. "Well," she chirped, her voice straining for a brightness it could no longer find. "Now that we all know who you are, let's simply forget this little mix-up and enjoy this spectacular evening, shall we?" The practiced charm was there, but it was a thin veneer over a core of pure panic. Ilara, still standing on the riser, didn't move. "I think," she replied, her voice cool and clear, "it's critically important that we remember exactly how we got here." The words landed like stones, shattering Victoria's fragile attempt at reconciliation. Marcus Thorne folded his arms, his expression grim, his eyes fixed on Genevieve. The guests shifted uncomfortably, the festive atmosphere now thoroughly poisoned. Isabel Chen, upstairs, was muttering furiously into her phone. Genevieve's smile was now a desperate rictus. "I was simply following protocol. You arrived unannounced." "Protocols are meant to protect people, Genevieve," Ilara cut in smoothly, "not to humiliate them. They are only as good as the reasons for which they are written." That drew a low, appreciative murmur from the crowd. The younger security guard was now staring intently at his own shoes, his jaw tight with shame. His partner had already retreated to the perimeter of the deck, trying to blend in with the shadows. Genevieve tried one last time, her voice pleading. "I'm sure we can work past this. You and we both want what's best for the Foundation." "Do we?" Ilara's soft question was an indictment that froze Genevieve mid-breath. "Because what I have witnessed tonight is a foundation whose public face is comfortable with the idea of humiliating a board member, a major donor, and—" She paused, letting the weight of the next word settle and crush everything in their path. "A full partner in a $5 billion clean energy merger." There it was again, the number, 5 billion. The murmurs swelled. Upstairs, phones tilted even further forward, as if the users were trying to physically absorb the drama. Genevieve blinked rapidly, forcing out a sound that was more of a choked cough than a laugh. You wouldn't seriously jeopardize the entire deal over this?" "Over this?" Ilara's voice was laced with disbelief. "Genevieve, this is everything." She finally started to descend from the riser, her saffron gown flowing around her. "You are correct. I wouldn't jeopardize the deal. I would end it. In fact," she said, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel, "I am." Gasps, sharp and loud, rippled through the deck. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. If anything, his lips tightened in a grim nod of approval. Isabel Chen was now speaking fiercely into her phone, no longer whispering. Genevieve's hand trembled so violently that champagne sloshed over the rim of her glass, a golden tear on her shaking fingers. "Ilara, let's be reasonable." "Reason," Ilara said evenly, now standing on the deck just a few feet from her, "is precisely why I will not allow $5 billion of capital intended to build a better future to sit in the hands of people who believe power is proven by who they can exclude from a room." Mateo's phone captured every syllable, every nuance. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this clip would be a global phenomenon by sunrise. Genevieve glanced desperately toward the bow of the yacht, as if willing her husband to materialize and save her. He didn't. The crowd was no longer hers to command. It was leaning, visibly and audibly, toward the woman in the saffron gown. Ilara walked straight past Genevieve, close enough for their dresses to brush against each other. Fire and ice. Without a single backward glance, she said, "You will receive the formal withdrawal paperwork by morning." For a moment, the only sounds were the gentle hum of the yacht's engines and the eternal whisper of the ocean. Then the applause rose once more, louder and more sustained than before, a roar of approval that drowned out everything else in the world. That applause didn't fade. It built into a steady, rhythmic ovation, a current of support pulling every last guest into its wake. The sound climbed the mezzanine, echoed off the polished brass fixtures, and spilled out over the dark waters of the bay. Genevieve stood frozen in the middle of it all, her smile completely gone, her face a pale, slack mask of ruin. The imperial sapphire of her gown suddenly looked less like a symbol of power and more like a shroud. Marcus Thorne was the first to move, stepping toward Ilara as she made her way through the throng of her new admirers. "You handled that with extraordinary grace, Ilara," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "That is exactly what true leadership looks like." His words unlocked something in the crowd. Isabel Chen's voice rang out from the mezzanine. "For the record, I saw her name on the board's official seating chart an hour ago. This was a choice, not a mistake." A chorus of agreement rippled back from the guests around her. At the bar, Matteo finally stopped recording. He tucked his phone safely into his pocket, as if he were sealing a priceless piece of evidence. "She never even raised her voice," he whispered to another server, who was looking on in awe. "Not once, and she just tore the whole thing down." Ilara moved through the deck with a preternatural calm, acknowledging the people who now swarmed her with a slight nod here, a firm handshake there, a quiet word of thanks. Every single step was being documented. The freelance photographer, his lens trained on her like a sniper's scope since she left the riser, trailed a few paces behind. His shots, the saffron dress a beacon of defiance, hair sleek, eyes steady and powerful, were already being uploaded to global wire services by his assistant on the shore. The MC, a seasoned professional sensing the seismic shift in power, abandoned the evening's carefully scripted order and returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, a reminder that this gala celebrates the work and generosity of all our partners, including Ms. Ilara Vance, whose unparalleled contributions have fundamentally transformed this foundation's global reach." The applause swelled yet again. People weren't just clapping out of politeness anymore. They were clapping because the narrative had been shattered and rewritten right before their eyes, and they were desperate to be seen on the right side of history. Genevieve tried to move, to reinsert herself into the flow of the party she was ostensibly hosting, but she was now an obstacle, an embarrassment to be avoided. Every time she took a step, her path was blocked, by a guest rushing to shake Ilara's hand, by the photographer asking for just one more shot, by a staff member politely offering to get Ilara a drink. The younger security guard, his face flushed with shame, approached Ilara quietly as she neared the gangway. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I am so sorry, I didn't know." She paused and looked at him, not with anger, but with a cool, appraising stare. She gave him a single sharp nod. "Now you do." A few feet away, his partner, Frank, was already deep in conversation with another guest, shaking his head and gesturing as if to say, "I had no part in this." From the mezzanine, the bank of phones remained pointed downward, a digital jury capturing the exact moment the room's center of gravity had shifted, permanently and irrevocably. What had been Genevieve Sterling's world an hour ago now belonged entirely to the woman in saffron. Marcus Thorne stepped to Ilara's side as she reached the top of the gangway. The board will back your decision, 100%, he murmured. I know, she said, her gaze still scanning the deck, taking in the entire scene one last time. But I don't need their permission. When she finally allowed her head to turn toward Genevieve, it wasn't with malice or triumph. It was with the quiet, dispassionate finality of a surgeon who had just completed a necessary but difficult amputation. And Genevieve Sterling, for the first time that entire night, looked away first. By the time Ilara reached the gangway, the applause had softened to a steady, reverent hum of conversation. She navigated through the last clusters of guests until she found herself at the far portside rail, a quiet, shadowed pocket of the deck where the city lights of Miami smeared across the black water. Genevieve was there, standing alone, the lenses and the sycophants having finally abandoned her. The sapphire of her gown rippled in the breeze, making her look small and uncertain. She didn't turn as Ilara approached, but her knuckles were white on the polished railing. You wanted a private moment to make your judgment, Ilara said, her voice calm and even. So here it is. Genevieve exhaled sharply, a sound of pure defeat. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. You've made your point. This was never about making a point, Genevieve, Ilara replied, her voice soft but unyielding. This is about ensuring it never, ever happens again. To anyone. Genevieve risked a glance over her shoulder, her face a ruin of smeared makeup and shattered pride. You've humiliated me in front of everyone we know. Ilara stepped closer, the air between them thick with unspoken history. No, she said with devastating simplicity. You humiliated yourself. I just made sure there were witnesses. The other woman's jaw tightened. You're going to destroy a $5 billion merger over a personal insult? Do you have any idea what that will cost? Ilara's gaze was unwavering. $5 billion is a bargain for the cost of letting people like you set the tone for the future. I don't invest in rooms where the first order of business is deciding who to keep out. Genevieve turned fully to face her then, a last spark of defiance in her eyes. You've just made a very powerful enemy. Ilara's lips curved, but it was the smile of a predator, not a victim. I didn't make you anything, she corrected. You chose that role for yourself the second you decided you had the authority to determine my place in the world. The sea hissed against the hull below, the sound of a final, drawn-out sigh. I will survive without your deal, Genevieve said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I have no doubt that you will, Ilara replied, but you won't survive without fundamentally changing the way you measure the worth of a human being. And I don't mean in dollars. She let that statement hang in the air, watching it land. Then she stepped back, turning toward the bright lights and the lingering crowd. Before she walked away, she added one last thing. The paperwork is already in motion. But if you ever truly want to rebuild your legacy, start by showing up in places where you are the one who doesn't belong. And just listen. Genevieve didn't answer. She just stood by the rail, her gaze fixed on the dark, indifferent water as the sound of Ilara's heels receded, blending back into the laughter and music of a party that was no longer hers. Near the top of the gangway, Matteo caught her eye and gave her a small, respectful nod. A silent acknowledgement between two people who understood the real meaning of the night. She returned it without breaking her stride. As Ilara Vance walked down that gangway, the saffron dress was the only thing anyone could see. A single, brilliant flame moving against the vast darkness, leaving a world of ash and ruin behind her. And what a story. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Have you ever been judged or dismissed by someone who had no idea who you really were? Share your story in the comments. And if you're finding value in this, if it's sparking something in you, please share this video with one person you know who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter, Now, for the incredible aftermath. By sunrise, the harbor was placid again, but the story was already a wildfire raging across the globe. Ilara's phone buzzed incessantly on the marble island of her penthouse kitchen, not with calls, but with a relentless stream of news alerts. Her name, alongside Genevieve Sterling's, was in every headline. Saffron vs. Sapphire. CEO Ilara Vance walks from 5B Sterling merger after public humiliation. High seas, showdown, viral video rocks philanthropy world. Power is who you let in. The quote that cost Arthur Sterling billions. Matteo's raw, unedited footage had become the modern-day Zapruder film of corporate implosions. It was on every social media platform, every morning news show, every corner of the internet. It was devastatingly clear. Genevieve's sneering words, the guard's hand on the case, Ilara's unshakable calm, and the precise moment the entire crowd turned on their host. Cable news networks ran it on a loop, on split screens showing Ilara's triumphant exit on one side and her on-deck introduction as the foundation's largest donor on the other. Pundits and analysts called it a masterclass in executive strategy, a public checkmate executed in less than 10 minutes. Across town, in a sprawling waterfront mansion, Genevieve Sterling was discovering the true price of her arrogance. Her phone was a smoldering ruin of unread messages, furious texts from board members demanding an explanation, polite but firm emails from sponsors reevaluating their commitments, and a single chilling text from her husband that read, "You have destroyed me." The foundation's PR team had issued a pathetic, watery statement about an unfortunate miscommunication, but it was instantly swallowed whole by the viral clip. Social media was a slaughterhouse. The hashtag #ChungerSaffronSlayer was trending worldwide. Memes were everywhere. Genevieve's tight-lipped smile photoshopped onto the captain of the Titanic. GIFs of Ilara saying, "I am," looped over epic movie scores. In a sterile downtown boardroom, 3 of the primary investors in Sterling Industries held an emergency call. The $5 billion merger had been the company's crowning achievement, the move that would secure its future for the next 50 years. Now, it was a pile of ash. "We cannot be associated with leadership that alienates partners at that level," one said flatly. "The reputational damage is catastrophic." Meanwhile, Ilara sat at her dining table, a cup of black coffee in her hand, calmly reading the news coverage. Her communications director texted her, his words practically vibrating with anxiety. "Press requests are coming in from every major outlet on the planet. CNN, BBC, Reuters. What do you want to say?" She typed back a simple 2-word reply. "Nothing yet. Let the footage do the talking." The story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the world. Matteo's identity had been protected, his privacy fiercely guarded by Ilara's team. But she made a note to handle his future personally. Courage like that deserved more than just gratitude. By mid-morning, the calls to her office began to shift. They were no longer from reporters, but from new, bigger, better potential partners. The head of a sovereign wealth fund opened with, "We saw what happened. If you are looking to redeploy $5 billion into a project that values integrity, we would like to be first in line." Another, a rival tech mogul, said simply, "I have never respected a competitor more. Let's meet." Outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, the city hummed with life. The yacht was just one night, one ugly confrontation, but the ripple effect was turning into a tidal wave. And Ilara Vance knew exactly how to surf. 1 week later, the harbor was glittering again, but the air was different. The story had become a legend, a cautionary tale whispered at every gala and board meeting. In a quiet, private ceremony, away from the press, Ilara Vance met with Matteo. She had learned he was a brilliant engineering student, working 2 jobs to put himself through school. She didn't just offer him a check. She offered him a full 4-year scholarship and a paid internship at Phoenix Global, telling him, "The world needs more people who are willing to bear witness." Later that day, she finally broke her silence. She didn't do a magazine cover or a television interview. She held a press conference at a local community center in a part of the city the Sterling's yacht would never have deigned to visit. She stood at a simple podium, wearing not a designer gown, but a sharp, professional business suit. "What happened last week was not about a dress, or a list, or a party," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It was about a mindset that believes value is inherent to a select few, and that power is a gate to be kept. That mindset is obsolete." She then announced the official, immediate creation of the Phoenix Fund. $1 billion, diverted from the now-dead Sterling merger, was being allocated as seed money. Its sole mission: to invest in entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders from underestimated and overlooked communities. "True power," she concluded, her eyes finding the camera, "is not about keeping the right people in. It's about finding the brilliant people who have been kept out and building a bigger, better room for all of us." The story didn't end with her walking off that yacht. It ended here, with her turning an act of exclusion into a revolution of inclusion. It wasn't just a victory, it was a new beginning. She didn't just rewrite the list. She threw it away and gave the pen to everyone else.